Today we're going to explore one of the most interesting stories in the Bible, which shows how even the greatest leaders can fail under pressure and how their actions can have serious consequences. We're talking about Moses, a man chosen by God to lead the people of Israel out of Egypt and through the desert towards the Promised Land. Despite his faith and dedication, Moses encountered an obstacle that he couldn't overcome. In this video, we're going to understand why, according to the Bible, Moses was not allowed by God to enter the Promised Land. Before we begin, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. That way, you'll be notified when we release new videos. The story of why Moses didn't enter the Promised Land is found in the book of Numbers. During the Israelites' journey through the desert, there was a big problem with a lack of water, and the people became very irritated. Faced with this difficulty, the Israelites began to complain about Moses and Aaron. They were ungrateful for the rescue that God performed by freeing them from Egypt and showed a lack of faith even after witnessing several times the power of God. They argued that it would have been better to stay in Egypt than to die of hunger and thirst in the desert, as it is written in verses 2 to 5 of chapter 20 of Numbers. The Bible tells of a difficult moment when the Israelites, without water in the desert, confronted Moses and Aaron. They were desperate and said, "It would have been better for us to die like our brothers who perished in the presence of the Lord. Why did you bring us to this desert to die here, us and our animals? Why did you bring us out of Egypt to this terrible place without crops, figs, vineyards, pomegranates, or even water to drink?" With each challenge, the Israelites questioned the leadership of Moses and Aaron, regretting not staying in Egypt. With so many complaints, Moses and Aaron knelt at the entrance of the tabernacle, where the glory of the Lord appeared to them. God then told Moses to take his staff and, along with Aaron, gather the Israelite community. Moses and Aaron were supposed to speak to a rock in front of the Israelites so that water would come out for everyone, including the herds. However, even after gathering the people as God had asked, they acted impulsively. Moses, frustrated, said, "Listen, rebels, must we bring water out of this rock for you?" As it is written in the book of Numbers, chapter 20, verse 11, Moses then raised his staff and struck the rock twice, causing water to come out and quenching the thirst of the people and the animals. After Moses acted impulsively, God reprimanded him. According to the Bible, God said to Moses and Aaron, "You did not trust me enough to uphold my holiness in the sight of the people of Israel. Therefore, you will not bring this people into the land I promised." This explains why Moses was not allowed to enter the Promised Land. Firstly, Moses acted rashly, setting aside his faith, which led him to make a grave mistake. The Bible describes Moses in Numbers chapter 12, verse 3, as an extremely patient man, more than any other on earth. However, in the incident with the rock, he lost this crucial patience. Secondly, Moses did not follow exactly what God had instructed. God asked him to speak to the rock, but Moses, in a more aggressive manner, struck the rock twice. Thirdly, this action not only showed Moses' disobedience and impatience, but also disrespected God's holiness before the Israelites. To better understand, it's important to consider the symbolism of the rock. God had already presented himself as a rock that was struck to provide water for his people, as described in Exodus chapter 17, verse 6, which says, "I will stand before you by the rock at Horeb. When you strike the rock, water will come out of it for the people to drink." Moses had already done something similar under the supervision of the elders of Israel. Later, in the New Testament, in Paul's first letter to the Corinthians, chapter 10, verse 4, this same wounded rock is seen as a representation of Christ, who suffered for the sake of God's people. Paul, in his letters, highlighted an important passage. He reminded that the ancestors were always under divine protection. They crossed the sea, were symbolically baptized with Moses, both in the cloud and in the sea, and ate and drank spiritual food and drink. This included the water that came from a spiritual rock, which represented Christ. However, despite these miracles, many did not please God and ended up dying in the desert. Moses' behavior when he struck the rock, even though he was instructed to just speak to it, shows more than simple disobedience. This act demonstrated a lack of respect for the meaning of God's actions. Moses not only failed to honor the holiness and glory of God before the people, but also acted on his own, taking on a role that wasn't his. This was seen as an attempt to take the authority of God, highlighting a serious failure of leadership and faith. Before the whole congregation of Israel, Moses acted as if he and Aaron were the ones responsible for bringing water from the dry rock. In this way, Moses inadvertently placed himself at the center of the situation, attributing to himself and his brother the actions that actually belonged to God. This self-glorifying attitude contrasted with the initial purpose of the miracle, which was to highlight God's providence and holiness before his people. This attitude not only diverted the glory that was due to God, but also represented an attempt to take on a divine role, where Moses projected himself as a kind of savior before the thirsty Israelites. This error had significant consequences, as it directly influenced God's decision to prevent Moses and Aaron from entering the Promised Land. God's rebuke of both of them shows that they shared the blame for this act of disobedience and presumption. Instead of simply doing what God commanded and speaking to the rock, they chose to strike the rock, which changed the spiritual meaning of the event. This error was not just a momentary lapse, but a sign of a deeper problem of trust and submission to God's will. Reflecting on these events, we understand why Moses was prevented from entering the Promised Land, described as a land flowing with milk and honey. This story serves as an important lesson about the need to obey God and be humble before Him. It is also a warning for spiritual leaders and devout people of all times, emphasizing the importance of recognizing and praising God as the true source of all victories and miracles. Furthermore, this biblical passage teaches about the responsibility of leaders to maintain their integrity and focus on God's will. Moses and Aaron, by not following God's instructions, not only disobeyed, but also confused the people about divine power. Instead of showcasing God's power, the incident with the rock became an example of what happens when leaders take the glory that belongs to God, distorting the purpose of the miracles. The story of Moses and Aaron shows the serious consequences that can occur when leaders fail to fulfill their mission and lose focus on who truly performs the acts of salvation and provision. It reminds us that leaders should always guide their communities in a way that glorifies God, not only with words but also with actions and decisions. This biblical teaching highlights the importance of obedience and shows that humility is an essential virtue for all who are in positions of leadership. If you liked this biblical explanation, don't forget to leave your comment below. Share the video with friends or family, and if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, make sure to do so to stay updated on more content like this.